Welcome to Five Writers, 5 Minutes. We're here to talk to you about writing and about our writing. Tristan Banks is away for a little while, and we're really thrilled that Sue Whiting has been able to join us. Hi, Sue.
Hi,
I'm Sarah Armstrong.
I'm Deborah Abella.
I'm Sue Whiting.
I'm Zanny Louise.
And I'm Leanne Tanner.
And this episode, we are talking about making magic real in your writing. When we write a magical story, a fantasy, we want the reader to believe the magic, don't we? We want them to completely suspend their disbelief. So how do we go about doing that as writers? My two books, Big Magic and Magic Awry, as the title suggests, are quite magical, got some fantasy in there. And so I had to play around a lot with that and learn a great deal in writing those, because previously I'd written realism. And I think the key for me was to really understand the magic initially, its origins, like where it came from, how it came into being, the rules of the magic. And in fact, I wrote the rules into the book. My character describes the rules. I had to, and I think this is really important, I had to make sure that the magical characters in the story really fully accepted and believed the magic. And I think that's key, because if they act like that is absolutely normal, and this is with any world building at all, whether it's magic or just sort of a different world with different rules in it, if the characters really, really, really believe it, then the reader will like go along with that. And just in the way that you and I accept the fact of gravity and weather, that sort of thing. If your character believes the magic like that, then I think the reader will as well. There was a lot of just making sure because when you make rules for magic, you then got to follow them. So I had to make sure it was all logical and it made sense. And that was actually much harder than I thought. Like in later drafts, it'd be like, they can't do that because there's a rule of X, Y, Z, and I've already had them do that earlier. So that's the other thing. It's got to make sense and it's got to be logical. So there's some of my thoughts on making magic real. What about you, Deb? How do you tackle this?
I totally agree. And you know what? I read a trilogy a few years back, and in the first book it said, this is the rule. If you do this thing, you will never, ever be able to come back to your old life, right? So it's a character choosing, you stay in your old life or you choose this new path, which was all sunshine and roses. The character went, great, I want the sunshine and roses. And I thought, oh my good gosh, what is going to happen now? And at the end of the book, they came back to their real life. And I remember thinking, I'm out. If you're going to set rules in this world and then break them, why should I believe anything else you write? So, like, for example, in the Book of Wondrous Possibilities, I have a book from 17th century France called A Story Grimoire. And I wanted this book to have something a little bit special to it so that when you read this book, it can feel like the story is coming to life. I had to do what you did, Sarah. So this isn't a regular book, of course, that you borrow from the library. I want there deliberately to be something sort of special about it. How do I do that? What is it? And what are the parameters of that? So, for example, the story can only come to life if the story is written for that person who is reading it. So it doesn't come to life to just anybody who picks up this book. And only certain people from a particular family line can actually write in this book. So this book's been handed down for sort of generations and generations. And once I set those rules, exactly what you said, Sarah, then I thought, right. So if someone else, a baddie, picks up the book and writes a story and hopes it comes to life and he'll be rich and famous, it won't work, because that's not how this book works.
Well, I like that idea of rules and sticking to the rules. And as a reader, and I don't read a lot of fantasy because I mainly write realism and I mainly read realism. But if any book, those rules are broken, whatever you set up, you lose me. As soon as you're pulled out of the story and then it doesn't work. So for me, as I said, I mainly write realism. But in my Pearlie and Pick series, I have sort of dabbled a little bit on the edges of fantasy. And the main sort of fantastical element of that story is my main character, Pearlie, can speak many languages, which, lots of kids can, but she can speak 27, so I've exaggerated slightly. And she can also speak animal languages. And this was my challenge, where I had to, like you, Deb and Sarah, I had to learn how and think about really carefully how to do that to make it credible, because it had to feel real. And if it doesn't feel real and believable, I knew it wouldn't work. And so what I did was And I thought I do this in all my stories really, is go back and find a kernel of truth. For this to work, I thought I have to make it to start with something that is true, something that feels believable, and then work from that. So her partner in adventure is a pig called Pig, and Pearlie and Pig can communicate with each other. And so when I was thinking, how am I going to make that work? I sort of thought, well, they grew up together as a piglet and a baby. And in the same way as, like, say, twins, you know, how they sometimes develop a language together and they speak their own little language while they're toddlers. I thought, well, that could sort of be the kernel of truth. I can build this idea that Pearlie and Pig can communicate with each other. Now, Pearlie has this ability for languages. So naturally she, you know, is exposed to pig language. She can naturally learn to speak pig. So that's sort of ticking that kernel of truth to grab from. Now, came to a tricky bit when I thought, well, what about Pig? And I thought, nah, I can't have Pig speaking English. That wasn't going to work for me. So I thought, that's okay. They can still communicate. Pig can't speak English, but he can understand English. And the kernel of truth I used for that was the fact that if you've got a dog, you'll know, you say, go and get your toy, whatever it is, and they'll go and get that toy. Go and do this. They understand you really, really, really well sometimes. So I use that as my, well, that would make sense. So I can just sort of take that kernel of truth and build on that. And so I'm always looking for that core truth to build on this fantastical element. Now, the animal languages that she can speak, I always make sure that she's had experience with those animals. She just doesn't magically be able to speak all languages, animal languages. She has to had some experience and she's learned how to speak those languages very quickly. And if she comes across an animal, like she comes across a polar bear at one point, and she doesn't know how to speak polar bear, so she draws on elk and brown bear in the same kind of way that you might draw on Spanish if you're trying to understand something in Italian. So I use those kind of kernels of truth to build as a starting point for that credibility and build from there. So that's how I went about it for Pearlie and Pig, and that's really my only experience with really dabbling with fantasy. So interesting to hear what you have to say, Zanny.
Well, I'm like you, Sue. I write realism for older age groups, but for younger age groups, for my early readers, they're all a bit magic. So Tiggy and the Magic Paintbrush is a series definitely bedded in magic. And it was kind of easy in the sense that when I was the age Tiggy is, so she's about 6, I think, I firmly believed in magic. So it wasn't a leap of faith for me to have, you know, that I was not suspending any disbelief, because in my experience as a 6-year-old, magic is definitely real. So I just went there with it. I suppose in that book, though, no one else can see her magic. So only she can see her magic. So that's kind of makes things a little bit easier to work. But it is about consistency, isn't it? But there's this lovely conversation. This conversation makes me think of another one. Matt Barnett, who is a very well-known children's author, does a wonderful YouTube about this topic. And he talks about the Venn diagram of truth and, you know, fantasy, and how in the middle there is a crossover. And it's about, as children's authors, we need to go to that middle bit, that portal, which will take any person, any reader, like no matter what age they are, into this magical world and convince them of its, you know, and they will go in there with certainty if you have the confidence to take them in there. And Leah, you're the master of this topic, so I'm dying to know what you say about this.
Look, for me, magic needs to be grounded in reality. And I think we're all saying more or less the same thing. In the real world, everything costs something. And it might be money, but it might be something else. It might be energy, it might be time, it might be effort. And the bigger the output, the bigger the input we need. You know, so if we need to make something enormous, it might take a huge amount of energy. And for me, magic needs to be the same if it's going to be believable. And this is one of the things that I really admire about Sarah's Big Magic and Magic Awry, that the people in it, they can't just wave their arms and make magic, you know, they have to get it from the natural world. And if they use too much, it can run out and they can't do it anymore until they've replenished their supplies. And it's the same in my book, Spellhound. So Flax can make magic, but she has to have these tiny little threads of wild magic to do it with, and they have to be caught. And that is a really hard thing to do. So a world where somebody just waves their hands and makes amazing things happen, everyone knows that that is not real. And it actually creates a really boring story. We all instinctively know that there's a cost to doing something amazing. And so we need to build that cost into making the magic that we write into our stories.
So good. Thank you, everyone. That's been really fascinating hearing how you all tackle it. And yeah, we said a lot of the same things. Make rules and follow them and have a kernel of truth in it and make sure that the magic is not just, doesn't come too easily to characters.
Yeah.
Hopefully that's helpful for you in writing your own magic stories. We're 5 Writers, 5 Minutes. We are a podcast and we are a YouTube channel, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.